We do have a couple of guests today, so I would like to ask our distinguished secretary, Chris Barker, to introduce them.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Happy 2016. We have a few guests with us. I believe it's their third visit, so I would just like them to stand up so we can acknowledge them this morning. We have Mike Swain, guest of Dick Pearsall, and we have Mike Schaafstall, guest of John Archer and Jim Ahern. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So today we are fortunate enough to have a couple of our scholarship winners back from their first semester at college, and I'll let Dan Williams to introduce them and bring them up here.
Good morning, Rotarians. Those of you who were here at the meeting before Christmas know that we were privileged to have two of our scholarship recipients, but these three guys were traveling. And so we made arrangements to have them come in today, and they're going to tell us a little bit about their first semester at college. First is Sydney Pilarczyk, who is attending Ohio State. Sydney?
Hello, everybody. Like Dan said, I'm Sydney Pilarczyk. I'm a student at Ohio State. First off, I would like to thank the Rotary for the very generous scholarship and the opportunity to speak to you all today. It's helped in so many ways, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity. Starting off at OSU, I was definitely a little nervous just because I've lived in the same house, in the same room in Hudson for my whole life. So moving was a big transition, but I think within those first couple of days, I definitely knew that OSU was the place for me and that I loved it. And from the people I met from so many different places and just the opportunities that presented themselves right away, it was a great experience. And academically, I'm a biology major on the pre-med track with a Spanish minor. My classes all went really well. I think Hudson City Schools really prepared me well for the transition to college classes. Chemistry was definitely kind of a killer, the hardest class, but it all went well in the end, and I really enjoyed it, and all my classes went well, actually. My favorite class was probably my Spanish class. It was advanced grammar. Sounds boring, but Spanish has probably been my favorite subject all of school, and it's really inspired me to definitely look into some study abroad opportunities within the next few years. Other than that, outside of the classroom, OSU just has so much to offer. It's so fun, like going to the football games, just being in Columbus, it's a great experience. This past winter, I joined a Women in Science and Math student organization, which I'm really excited about. And other than that, the second semester, what I'm most excited about is definitely getting back into some volunteering experiences. That's probably what I miss most about my time at Hudson High School, especially through the service learning program. So I just applied to a trip to go to a city in the United States to do some volunteering work through a community called Buckeye Serve at Ohio State. So I'm excited to see where that will take me and excited for the future. And thank you again for the opportunity. It's been amazing.
You can see why we get so excited about scholarship winners. And one of the best things that I do in Rotary is get to interview all these students in the spring. And we've already started our selection process for next year's recipients. Applications are due right before spring break, and we'll be interviewing the beginning of April. Well, our second scholarship winner that's here this morning, and her parents are here also, is Haley Summer, and she's a Kent State Golden Flash. And also just had knee surgery, so
Good morning.
Good morning.
Like Mr. Williams said, my name's Haley Summer. I attend Kent State University. I am a biochemistry pre-medicine student. I'm thinking about adding a second major, though. I was already 2 years into college when I started because of all the post-secondary and AP work that I've done. So with my university scholarships lasting 4 years, I wanted to add a second major to get the most out of the money that they're giving me. I am a big participant in the RTC program. With my knee surgery, that kind of set me back a little bit, but I have a good shot at being contracted, which means you're basically signing your military career as a second lieutenant next semester. They've offered me a potential full medical school scholarship. So I would go to medical school and graduate as a captain in the Army, which would be kind of cool to graduate as a captain as opposed to a second lieutenant. My classes went well this semester. I started the year kind of unconventionally. I moved in a week and a half before school started, actually, and joined the marching band. So we had a week of just the marching band kids on campus, which was really nice. It was kind of a culture shock when everybody else started moving in because the campus wasn't dead anymore. So that was fun. We spent all week practicing and rehearsing on the field, and after that, classes started, so that was more of a conventional college experience. I'm in the jazz ensemble. I play lead trumpet for Bobby Salvaggio's head jazz ensemble at Kent State. We're actually going to Elmhurst College in Chicago in about a month for one of the biggest college jazz festivals in the country. Also in February, I'm auditioning for the President's Own Marine Corps Band. So if I get into that, it's a 4-year commitment to the Marine Corps as a sergeant. So that's a little different track than the Army. But I'm really appreciative of this opportunity, of the scholarship. It's helped me out a lot. I'm really enjoying my time at Kent State, and I look forward to the future.
Isn't it great to have a lot of different opportunities like that? Think back to when we were in undergraduate school. All I did was study. I didn't have time to do any of this stuff. You believe that, right? Okay, our last student today is another Buckeye attending Ohio State, Brendan Burdett.
Good morning, everyone. How are we? So I'm Brendan Burdett. I'm a freshman at Ohio State, and the first thing I was asked when I came back from school is, how much weight have you gained? The freshman 15, it's real, isn't it? I've actually lost some weight, so I think my first semester was pretty successful. But in all honesty, my first semester was really incredible. I met a lot of great friends, did really well in school. Football games at Ohio State are incredible. Well, everyone except for the Michigan State game, but we don't really talk about that. I'm on the accounting track, so I plan on getting my master's in accounting in 4 years, and I also plan on minoring in Spanish. I would say that my anthropology class was my favorite class first semester because it talks a lot about culture and where we come from as people, so I think that's very interesting. I got a 4.0 last semester, which is pretty good for myself, I would say. In everything I do, I look to represent the Hudson community, Hudson Rotary Club, and my family. So doing well in school is really important to me. I'd like to thank you guys for the scholarship you've given me. You're allowing me to fulfill my dreams and pursue my career in being an accountant. So thank you very much.
We're a little pressed for time because we want to make sure we leave a lot of time for Rick to talk this morning. So instead of having questions now, all 3 students will be here after the meeting. So if you have questions, come on over to the table. I'm sure they'd be glad to answer them. So thank you very much, Rotarians, for supporting the scholarship program. And Catherine and I look forward to presenting the next class in April. Thank you.
Just as a reminder, those scholarships are given with your help because it's the fall fundraiser, the rose sale, the selling caramel corn. It's the gifts that we solicit for the gala that's coming up in May that provide the funds and the opportunity for these young students. So moving right along with our 3-minute Rotarian today is James Field.
Very good. Okay. James Field, 2700 Parkside Drive. No. So good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. So first of all, I've got to say, as a member of the school board, our students fantastic. So hopefully everyone feels, everyone feels that their investment of their tax dollars is paying off. All the students that we've seen, all the community projects, the choir and so forth. So that's my little advertisement. Anyway, so 3 minutes. I was born in Highland Park, Illinois. So if you're not familiar with Highland Park, think Beechwood. It's the exact same demographics. My father was a general contractor, built buildings, hospitals, the one where I was born. He built our house, which he told me that he's passed on, but cost $40,000 for the land and the building. I looked it up recently. It just sold for just under $1 million. So a little bit of appreciation out there. And I worked for that company, as did my brothers, as a laborer carrying brick and pouring concrete. So I've been there. Anyway, also my father was a member of the Rotary Club, so there is a Rotary history. My mom was a graduate of Northwestern, so we do come from a Big Ten family. My dad went to Michigan, as did my two brothers, my grandfather, my uncle, my aunt, and so forth. But my daughter goes to the Ohio State, so I root for almost all their games. So I was an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School, and I rowed at Wharton. And actually, when I was on the team, Phil was the manager of the team at the time, right?
A little bit earlier than that, John.
Yeah, a couple years earlier, but same team. And then I went to work for GTE, so I worked for the phone company and was all over the country with them, out in Salt Lake City at a phone plant, satellite operations and so forth. So, and then ended up at GTE Telenet, which was started by the guys who started ARPANET. So I actually worked with the guys who invented the internet, the actual ones.
Did you know Gore?
Well, it's actually made up. Al Gore actually never said he invented the internet, but it's a good story. Anyway, so we're like the first to use email. Like everyone's heard of email, right? Back then it was new. Can imagine. So I went back to school for my MBA at the Wharton School. And then I worked on a book on using PCs in business. And I ended up in marketing research for Burke Marketing Research. Worked for them in Cincinnati and then in Connecticut. And that's where I married my wife, Cynthia Reevy, who was in brand management for James River. And I have 3 daughters, Carolyn, Leah, and Katie. All were born in Norwalk, Connecticut. I actually have some pictures. So this is me in college. This is me after college at the same spot. My middle daughter said, "Gee, Dad, that looks like half of you." So I said, "It's so generous of you to give up whatever inheritance there is to your other 2 sisters." Really nice of her.
And James, that's a statue of me up there.
And there's Phil. That actually was, did you ever live in these dorms?
Pardon?
Did you live in
No, I lived in the
quad?
senior dorms
Oh, okay.
as a freshman. I don't know.
Yeah. So, yep. Yeah, very stern place. And then this is actually me after college on the crew in Cincinnati, believe it or not. There I am in the middle. And, whoops. Who runs this thing? There's me about 3 weeks ago on the Mighty Cuyahoga, my single, so. And there's my wife and my 3 daughters, and we're in Siena. So where I left off, I was working in Connecticut for Glendang Associates, a consulting firm, and then I worked for General Foods. Kool-Aid, I was Kool-Aid Man for a while, among other things, in White Plains, New York. Traveled the country working with our food brokers. And then we dropped the brokers and they eliminated our job and they said, well, we have a job for you with our sales office in Cleveland. And I was like, all right, who did I tick off? I have to go to Cleveland. But we come out here, cost of living is low. Hudson, people asked, we moved to Hudson, people asked back east what Hudson's like. I said, it's like a Disney version of Connecticut. It's like perfect Connecticut. So low cost of living, great schools, all that stuff. And then later they closed the office and said, well, we'll move you back east. And we're like, we don't want to leave now. We love it. So I now work for Heinen's at their main office. I do price modeling and product assortment and consumer target marketing and just about any type of analytical thing that they need. I also did product selection, so I was the coffee buyer and that sort of thing. It's a great company to work for. And then I joined Rotary 5 years ago. It's a suggestion of Bill Woodridge and Dave Basil. So thank you both very much for that suggestion. And I've been honored to be elected to the school board. Just got elected the second time in November against stiff competition. Hopefully I got your vote. I know I didn't get your wife's vote. But I belong to Temple Beth Shalom, and my wife is very active with the Methodist Church. I coach soccer for all, and as you see earlier, I row my skull. So a couple other pictures. We like to travel. This is in Nuremberg, Germany, and it's a map of the town. And now if you could see who put these maps in there, that was Rotary. So we like to travel. This is at the stadium. My father was in the Army in World War II, and my father-in-law, Colonel Richard Reevy, was a Marine colonel with 4 tours of Vietnam as squadron commander and then commandant of the amphibious warfare school. I met James Amos, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps at the time, was in my father-in-law's squadron, so it's kind of cool. And then this is this is the family. Be jealous. This was taken a couple weeks ago down in Hilton Head. The golf course in the back is a Pete Dye golf course, and that's where my father-in-law, mother-in-law live full time. So they just walk up to the golf course. Yes. Yeah, this was my mother-in-law's idea, and we corralled the kids. We're like, just be good for like 20 minutes so we can take these pictures. So that's the Colonel, that's Mrs. Colonel, my wife. My oldest, Carolyn, graduate of Hudson, is a cop in the projects up in Cleveland. My middle daughter, Leah, is a reserve graduate. So, and she works in Manhattan for a small private equity firm. And my youngest daughter, Katie, is a junior at the Ohio State, majoring in zoology and hopes to be a veterinarian. And my wife, Cynthia, actually, if you like, teaches yoga on Wednesday nights at the Methodist Church. And then my mother and father-in-law, and this is my brother-in-law, my wife's sister, and their kids. They live in Atlanta, but their daughter got a scholarship to Syracuse, so she's had a little bit of a weather shock. And one brief thing about my mother-in-law that really impressed me is that since she was the squadron commander's wife, it was her duty whenever a pilot was shot down, killed, or missing in action, she was the one who would go with the chaplain to tell the wives. So that was really dramatic to hear those stories from her. And then this is my Soccer for All group a couple years ago, and they've stayed with the program. It's a great program. We have kids from the high school and the middle school and college who are partners, and these are special needs kids, and we teach them soccer skills and play, so that's a lot of fun. So anyway, that's my history. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, that's I guess we just won't have this microphone.
Oh, it's for the mic?
Yeah, it's not. Sorry. There we go.
It works. It works. We need a 3-minute Rotarian for the next 2 weeks, and where's Joe Zapatowski? Can you do it next week? Okay, so that's Joe Zapatowski. And for the following week, January 20th, I will draw a name out of the hat. It is Tom Tobin. Tom's not here. But, I'll call him. We'll put down Tom. Okay, so moving on with our main program today. George Snyder will introduce our distinguished guest.
Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. Happy New Year to all of you. I'm actually substituting this morning for Bill Wooldridge, whose wife Jo is having surgery later today, so we all wish Jo the best. Our subject this morning is philanthropy. And because Hudson is a virtual hotbed of charitable giving and also a virtual hotbed of charitable foundations, we've decided to devote the entire month to the subject of philanthropy. Next week, we will have Kirsten Toth from the GAR Foundation in Akron. The week after that, Deb Hoover from the Burton D. Morgan Foundation. And then the missing Tom Tobin will be here in the final Wednesday in January to talk about the American Endowment Foundation. So I think it's going to be a fascinating month. We'll learn a lot about philanthropy. Our guest today is Rick Keller, who is president of the Margaret Clark Morgan Foundation. And that is a foundation which supports enrichment of the human mind through the promotion of mental wellness, the arts, and education. Rick is a native of Hudson. He attended the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, earning a BS degree in nuclear engineering. He later earned his MBA degree cum laude from Syracuse University. As a U.S. Army officer, Rick served both in infantry and also in the Green Beret Special Forces, holding a variety of combat leadership positions. Later at the Pentagon, he became Director of Resourcing for the U.S. Army Operations and Readiness Initiative and supervised an $8.6 billion program. Rick is a veteran of every conflict from the first Gulf War through the War on Terrorism, and retired from the reserves as a full colonel in 2014, which I think is a very impressive military career. Rick joined the private sector in 1998 in the financial service industry and came to the Margaret Clark Morgan Foundation as president in 2005. Since that same year, he has also served on the Talmadge School Board, where he is currently president of the school board. Please join me now in welcoming Rick Keller.
Thanks, folks. I know a lot of you folks here, or some of you, I should say. As somebody that lives now south of the border in Talmadge, it's fun to hear, I say kids, young adults, one of which is the daughter of John, who is a year older than me and also a graduate of Hudson High School. It's kind of cool. What's that? Yeah, that's right. He is older. It's, I guess I stand and look at, as I get introduced, I'm always a little bit embarrassed, but I'm a product of Hudson Public Schools. And though I live south of the border now, I'm spreading that great success that I felt here and inspiring kids in Talmadge to aspire to be able to do some of the things that I know I see that the kids from Hudson are able to do. So I'm fortunate to be in the job that I'm in. I remember when I first came to it, I was like, how hard can it be to give money away for a living? And I couldn't believe it. Sitting at Starbucks, I'm going to be on the internet, it's going to be lots of fun. And I had a friend of mine tell me, classmate of mine from West Point actually, that lives out in Bath. He said, hey, you're only going to last 3 years because you're going to get bored because it's not going to be that interesting. You're the kind of person that you're going to want to deploy. You're going to end up spending 6 months away volunteering to do stuff in the service and that sort of thing. And what I found when I quickly found when I got to the foundation is that we had a founder who was a lovely lady who I knew pretty well, and who commanded us to think bigger. And I'm going to begin and end with a quote from Peg. And I realized very quickly, and folks that are in this line of work, I know Phil can relate to this too, that and anyone that does venture capitalism or any kind of investing can realize that when you're investing in a private equity firm or small business, or you're drilling for gas, or you're doing any of that kind of stuff, it's real easy to figure out and to measure the results, because you either found gas or your private equity endeavor created wealth or expanded business or those types of things. But when in philanthropy, measuring that success is a lot tougher. And then when you have a founder that tells you got to think bigger, which means swing the bat, look for grand slam home runs. How do you do that? And then how do you measure whether you're successful? How do you move the needle, I guess, in the end of the day? So I really started looking into philanthropy, thinking, gosh, how is it that I've been tasked with this great mission by the Morgan family, and how do we accomplish it? And I'll share what our kind of what inspires me, and I'm going to start with the story behind our mission, and then I'll quickly go through what our mission is, and then I'm going to give you a sense of how I view the world of philanthropy. I stole a couple ideas from different folks that are smarter than me out there in the world that have written on philanthropy, and the different ways that you can do it and how you can kind of get a sense for what it is, and then I'll end with kind of a neat quote from Peg. But if you look here, this is the Morgan family. You've got Bert and Peg on the right. That's I think that's 2005 in Eleuthera, a little bit older there. Bert passed in 2003. The Bert and D. Morgan Foundation you'll hear more about from Deb Hoover, founded in 1967 actually, so they're coming up on 50 years. And then Peg's Foundation, which was founded in really an idea in 99, chartered in 2001, but it wasn't until Bert passed in 2003 that his estate split between the two. So we didn't really see funds of significance until about 2005, 2006, which is about when I got there. We came into being by the great help and work of Deb Hoover, who now runs Bert's Foundation, and I'm always appreciative of having a lawyer start us on the right track, because I'm not. I'm a rule breaker. I'm a Green Beret, for crying out loud. But she set up a lot of administrative procedures that disallow me from doing things that I wish I could just do, which is good, by the way. That's why I'm not in jail right now. And some folks sometimes ask us, well, why two foundations? So you get these two people, they love each other, they're holding on to each other. Well, Bert was a unique character, as most of us know, and Peg was also a unique character. And when I say character about Bert, that was actually on the Hudson front page of the Hudson now Hub Times. City loses entrepreneurial, philanthropist, and character was I think what the headline read, and because he was an interesting person. And these two folks were unique, but united in purpose. And the boards and missions actually reflect very different parts of their personality. And that's why we exist separately, because of the unique focus and the uniqueness of each mission warrants two different organizations focused solely on that. And on the left, I share that picture. That's the Morgan family. I knew Bert pretty well. I know some folks in Bert and Peg pretty well, and I know some folks in the room knew them even better. But a lot of folks didn't realize, oh yeah, you've got Suzanne, Mary, and a son, Dave. And most of the kids had moved away. And most folks didn't know that their youngest son, Dave, has schizophrenia. Dave's doing well now. He lives in a group home in Ohio, not too far from here. And I see him every once in a while. His sister looks in on him. But there was a lot of brokenness, and the reason I'm starting with this is to share that most folks in town didn't realize this level of brokenness. So here's somebody that has all the money in the world, all the force of character in the world, a loving mom, yet how do they find a solution for a son who has schizophrenia? And it was tough. And this is Dave and Peg a little bit later in life. At a group home, and I always use this picture as an inspiration. And Peg used to be very embarrassed. If she was here, she would be okay now. But when I first came to the foundation, we didn't talk about this stuff in front of folks because of the stigma surrounding mental illness. And as we started the journey, when she charged us to say, hey, you got to think bigger. And I said, okay, we got to think bigger. That means we got to talk about this stuff. And you hear now in the news with different shootings, college rate of suicide, it's somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 a year. People are starting to come out of the shadows, talk about it. One of our national partners, Patrick Kennedy, former congressman, recent book that he has out, we've partnered with him nationally to do some work. Glenn Close has been to town working with us on breaking the silence. So it was a journey that we actually had to go on 10 years ago with the Morgan family. And we were able to do that. And really, I should say Peg was able to do that because it was something that was tough for her to do. And again, you know, Bert went out, slayed the dragon, and Peg was at home trying to manage her son and her family with this great brokenness and this great challenge. So what is that? Why is that important? Well, that's where our mission came from. And our mission, I've got up here, it's basically helping folks that have serious mental illness. And when we think of that, we think of chronic, recurring depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, all the way through to the more severe stuff. And it's primarily in northeastern Ohio, although, like as I mentioned earlier, we do have some national transformational stuff. And what I've found is Ohio is one of those neat states that I want to say it's bipartisan. People might they'll take that the wrong way. Ohio is big enough to matter, small enough to be agile, and Ohio is middle of the road enough to try stuff and not have it necessarily be polarizing. So we sit at a place in terms of mental health care where we can actually get stuff done that gets templated or you know, employed across the nation as an example, whether for a larger state or for a smaller state. And it's kind of a gift that we have, and it's a pretty neat thing. As a foundation, we're endowed at $90 million, which means we're at about $3 or $4 million in operational and grant making annually, which doesn't sound like a lot of money. I thought it was a huge amount of money until the first year I was here, and I realized, wow, this stuff goes fast. As a mental health foundation, that's pretty big. As a national player, it's not particularly large, but it's amazing what I found we've been able to do by leveraging, and I'll talk a little bit about the philanthropic side of stuff that we do. Vision, and our vision statement is the one place where we also we reserve a little bit of money to do arts and education, primarily in Hudson or the greater Summit County area. It's actually stuck way down deep in our vision statement, but it was something that was important to Peg, so we continue to do that. So for the accountants to be, and for the mathematicians in the room, 2.4 million mental health stuff annually, about 350,000 in arts, and then 350,000 or so in education. And then our values, obviously the most important one to us is to stay aligned with what Peg would have us do. So there's three slides I'm going to kind of shoot through here. When I first came into the industry of philanthropy, it's still a very fragmented industry. Folks will tell you that when you've met a foundation or a philanthropist, you've met a foundation or a philanthropist. Everyone's a little different. No two are typically the same. And so I've always thought, like, feel-good giving. And as I go through these three things, this is going to sound like a cynical philanthropy 1.0, and then there'll be philanthropy 2.0 that seems a little more sophisticated. And then, of course, there's philanthropy 3.0. Well, that's what we do, which is the better or best way to do it. But I'll submit that we do a little bit of each one of these every year because that's the nature of the work that we're in. So there's feel-good giving. It's where a foundation or an organization or a person will focus on how much money is there for me to grant. It's about giving a check. It's about feeling good because, hey, I did something, and there's not necessarily a lot of follow-up or, hey, what was the impact or what was the outcome? And typically what you'll see in an organization is the board and the staff gets real excited about this big, thick grant book, and it's kind of like, white or black smoke comes out of the chimney, and those are the folks that are winners or they're losers. And you really focus on who's getting a grant. And the term grant is always, when I first came to the foundation, always sort of bothered me because I always thought of it as a partnership and investment. But hey, I'm a grant maker, we give grants. So we've done a lot of this in the course of my tenure at the foundation. Philanthropy 2.0 is kind of the white tower giving. It's when you feel like, well, I kind of know more than most folks do about whatever this particular item is. So it becomes a little bit more academic theory of change. There's a lot of Carver, business management, strategic planning, 5-year plans, and I always think of 5 and 10-year plans. I always think of the old Cold War Russian era way of how they governed themselves. And what you'll see in those is like annual reports that will focus on, kind of like, hey, here's there's these big grants that we do, and there's strategic plans and stuff like that seems like it makes a lot of sense, but when I go back historically to our early annual reports and I flip through them, I'm sort of embarrassed by what's in them, because there's a 5-year plan and it says we're going to do this, and it's funny. But again, we do that stuff and it matters, and it's helpful in philanthropy. And I sometimes get frustrated. Community foundations sometimes get stuck in this model, and it's hard to sometimes partner with them. 3.0, doing whatever it takes. Well, of course, this is what we do at the Margaret Clark Morgan Foundation, right? Oh, this is the way to do it. 3.0. We don't do an annual report, for crying out loud. I quit doing it because I felt like it took time, resources away from what we were doing. But you'll see where you're actually looking at, and an example of this would be in our case. The first one would be, hey, we gave a grant to Neomed to establish a chair in psychiatry, and we felt good about it. And the second, and the philanthropy 2.0 for us would be, or maybe I'll say the stadium grant, was something we did that helped build a stadium here in Hudson for the high school. 2.0 would be the chair in psychiatry, where we said, oh, hey, we felt good. That was a big grant. Boy, we've really made a difference. And then 3.0 is really where we start looking at, well, how do we reduce the suicide rate on college campuses in Ohio? Or how do we reduce the, somebody that suffers mental illness typically, when they're arrested, is in jail about 33 days is the average, whereas for somebody that doesn't have mental illness, it's about 25. So what causes that difference? And that's an expense to society. Those 7 days in jail aren't cheap. So we start looking at, well, how do we move that needle? And that's kind of the 3.0 approach. And this is where we've evolved really in the past 2 years with the board. We original chairman, when I came to the foundation, was Suzanne Morgan, Peg's daughter. She did a great job focusing us, echoing her mother's charge to us, which was to think bigger. And she retired from the board a year ago, and we've continued that charge. And it's kind of where we're at now. We have several initiatives. If anyone can remember retired Justice Evelyn Stratton, Supreme Court Justice here in the state of Ohio, we've actually retained her. I'll say she's a distant staff member to us, but we've contracted her to basically go around to the largest counties in Ohio and address the problems of the seriously mentally ill suffering in jail, and how do we break that cycle. So you get somebody that has a mental illness, they're out in the middle of the street directing traffic or waving a gun around, they get arrested. They're a danger to society. The arrest needs to happen. Sometimes that arrest escalates because the officer doesn't understand this person's mentally ill, there's a different way to approach. Sometimes they can't anyway because the person's dangerous. They end up in jail, they can't self-advocate, they get off their meds. It's just this expensive, difficult cycle and dangerous cycle. And she's got, there's some templates out that we know will work, and so we're investing in her to kind of go around to the largest counties and see if we can't change some of that. And our measure will be the average stay for somebody with serious mental illness in jail, how many mentally ill folks, how many crisis situations occur, how many officers have crisis intervention training, which are police officers that understand, hey, I can detect the signs of somebody that's mentally ill, so I need to approach this person a little different, and things like that. So that's kind of what's big on our horizon, and I know we're tight on time, so I'll keep moving along. So I want to close. I want to open up to questions, because to me I do that better anyway. There's a lot of information about the foundation and some of the details on our website, of course. But I'll open it up to questions. And the first question, I think, anyone know the answer to this one?
Indian.
That's right. Exactly. Go Tribes. So I want to close this out with another quote from Peg that was given on the same day of the first one, in the first strategic planning meeting that I went to in January 2006, the month after I got to the foundation, which was, she said, you guys got to think bigger. And then we talked about doing a board outing, courtesy of one of our vendors. And I said, well, Peg, what do you think about it? Because Peg didn't say a lot in meetings, but when she did, it was very important. She said, well, go Tribes. So we went to the Indians game. that summer, and so I love those two quotes. And it's interesting, little anecdote about that Indians game is Travis Hafner set the, that summer, I think it was that summer, maybe it was the subsequent summer, set the single season record for Grand Slam home runs at that particular game. It was pretty cool. I think in the first inning we were up 11-0. It was sunny. It was the best baseball game I've ever been to, and it was the last one Peg went to. So it was pretty neat. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Rick, thank you very much. I enjoyed that a lot. As one who tries to go after grants, it strikes me that there is a great reluctance on the part of most foundations to do repetitive grants, things that might come up year after year. How do you handle that?
Yeah, there's a couple comments I'd make to that. The first one is, in philanthropy, one of the frustrations I have in philanthropy is we talk a big talk about collaboration or things like that, or specific needs, but then we don't practice what we preach. And in the example you'll use is a lot of foundations, mine included, a board will get weary of the usual suspects. You know, particularly in arts, where arts isn't necessarily the most easily self-sustaining operation. So it's possible an arts grantee might need $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 every year for them to just exist and to produce the work that they produce. The Hudson Bandstand Concert Series is a good example. Hudson Cable TV is another one. Actor Summit, they sell tickets. They've moved down to Akron. They sell tickets, but for them to be excellent, sometimes they need that annual supplement. So I often have to convince my board that, okay, you guys are bored, but the community isn't. And yeah, you're bored. Oh, this is the same grant again. I'm like, so? Like, that's true. But don't let our boredom disallow that organization from being successful. So it's hard. I handle it by having this conversation with my board. It doesn't always work. There's another initiative that we're putting, actually I'm going to meet as soon as I leave here with my chairman and Bob Kallstrom, who's actually a local here in Hudson, and talk about looking at a handful of arts organizations that we've worked with and committing kind of like a 5-year commitment where we say, hey, listen, let's settle on an annual amount that we can support you with so that you're not spending your time every year trying to fill out a piece of paperwork on I know you know, hey, what's the procedure this year? Because it's changed. Like you guys, oh, we need a different form now, or who knows what. And I'm very cognizant of the burden we have sometimes put on our grantees administratively. And one of our thoughts this year is to kind of alleviate some of that where we can. Particularly, you know, a development office at a university, you know, they've got a platoon of people running around in suits and ties that will take you to lunch and make you feel great. But, you know, a small arts organization doesn't have that. They don't have the capacity. And you know, what's our most valuable asset? Time. It's never usually money, it's time. So you're putting a bigger burden on that organization sometimes, and it's not fair to them. So.
I have a question. Oh.
Go ahead, Phil. You know, Rick, I appreciate what you're doing and the enthusiasm you bring to your job. I think the idea of what the Morgans have done for this community is even just starting to scratch the surface. You have people that are starting to realize what an enormous impact he's left on this community and will continue to leave on this community. Bert Morgan and Peg were basically very different people. Entirely different people. You recognize that. I happened the privilege of being the neighbor of Bert for about 35 years, and Peg was probably my wife's best friend. And Bert was a good friend too. I had a wood shop in my backyard, and he used to love to come over there and play with the mechanics of the thing. So I had a lot of chance to talk with him about his feelings and his philosophy of how he was going to carry this thing forward. Peg, the interesting thing about Bert is that he did not have cable television.
Right.
And so as a result, Peg could not watch television. The Indians So where did she watch television? At our house. So this is a wonderful relationship. I said, Bert, why don't you go out and buy cable? For whatever reason, he could have bought the cable company, but he didn't do it. The impact that those two have left on this community and will continue to leave on this community is absolutely amazing, and I applaud you for what you're doing.
No, thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. Hudson's blessed in terms of philanthropy because part of it's the affluence of the community, but there's also a spirit of community and giving. I mean, my mom taught third grade in Hudson Public Schools for 20, 25 years back when Jerry Reeves was the superintendent. And one of the reason I'm on the school board in Talmadge is and if I lived in Hudson, I might have competed. I don't know. It might have been a contested election. Who knows? But like wherever I've been, I'm involved in the community, and I think that's a spirit of what you learn growing up in a town like this. And in philanthropy, it's particularly poignant. I mean, like I said, Deb will tell you about the BDM since 1967. That you're going to hear from Kirsten Toth, who is a Hudson resident, who's the VP down at GAR Foundation. Deb will be in. Your fine son and the work that you guys do. I mean, you're a national, organization affiliated with philanthropy too, and then the Hudson Community Foundation, of which your fine son and you were kind of a part of as well. And it's just beginning, even though we've been doing this work for quite a while. In this town, it's just beginning. And when I talk about these foundations, I mean, you're talking about the 8th, 9th, or 10th, and then we're the 24th largest foundations in northeastern Ohio, and that includes Cleveland Foundation, Akron Community, different folks like that. It's a significant asset for the town. You're right.
I remember Bert had an organization that provided seed money for. Is that still an active thing, or whatever happened to that?
Yeah, the CDI, I think it's Concept Development Institute. I was just talking about that the other day. I don't think so. I think it's gone by the wayside. If you remember a gentleman named Bill Fellows, who was a confidant and friend of Bert's, he's going to be 100 April 10th, and every time I see him, which is about every 2 months, we talk about, wow, Rick, we got to get that CDI going again. I'm like, Bill, I'm so far away from that line of work. But our board members, I'll share real quick. Penny Freeze, I think former member of this group here, lives in town. Bill McGraw, whose father was a good friend of Bert, he lived in town for a while. He's our chair. Keith Riley, who is Peg's grandson, lives out in California. Super kid. I say kid, he's not that much younger than me, but great asset for us. Bob Kallstrom, I remember, I mentioned already, here in town. I think his grandfather built the Acme Plaza originally. Let me go down the list. Jeff Knoll, his father, Tom and Jenny Knoll, Stark & Knoll Law Firm in Akron. John Pavlov, he's chair of the board down at Akron. I have nothing to do with anything going on at the University of Akron. So we've got a good group of trustees, and some of our former trustees. I know Marianne Winder, some of y'all knew her well. We miss her a lot, and she was the one that really helped empower Peg. Peg was in a marriage where she listened. She didn't necessarily speak. I mean, Bert, she had her own mind, but she chose when and where she would stand up, and she did it often with Bert. But most people wouldn't see it, and you certainly wouldn't see it unless you're more private or a neighbor. But finding her voice and understanding of our foundation and what she would be capable of doing, I think Marianne was a great support to her, and has helped also chart our course to where we are now. Yeah.
My question is, so for particularly your programs, helping psychology in the universities and with the police, what sort of metrics do you use to see if you've been able to push the needle on that?
It's looking at incarceration rates, and it's what's difficult is that it depends on if it's a county or what type of jail or really police force we're referring to. You can count. crisis intervention, I think, teams, and it's a training, and somebody has I think your daughter's a police officer, so she would probably have heard of it or maybe ask her about it. It's CIT, and what it allows you to do, it's a 40-hour training that certifies you, and they put you in role play scenarios where you come into an apartment and somebody's got a knife and they're exhibiting behavioral health symptoms, and how do you talk them down? Some departments require that training for you to carry a taser. So police officers they like the additional tool of having a taser because it allows them. It's a less lethal intervention. So you can measure how many CIT trained officers. Ohio leads the nation in that. But ultimately, it's really how many officer-involved shootings with a mentally ill person would be the better way to maybe look, or how many injuries did police officers suffer, using that as an example. Those are the metrics that we look at. Probably the biggest one is really the most expensive one. We're convinced that if we can reduce the incarceration rate or the turnaround or the recidivism of somebody that's mentally ill that ends up back in the judicial system or the jail system, the daily rate on that is huge. And if we can take some of that savings and put it into prevention stuff, it's the ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. Convincing a lawmaker that looks at the Department of Corrections as a separate budget line item than they do, Medicaid or Medicare, they're tough arguments to make. But if you can make them financially, it's easy to get a legislature to say, "Oh, let's do it." Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I had a question that was related to the type of program that you're sponsoring with the police organizations, and that has to do with the age group between 18 and 25, which if you're going to become bipolar or exhibit signs of schizophrenia, that's a time when it's very common for people that haven't been diagnosed earlier to show up. And most of these, if kids that are in the workforce, there isn't the opportunity. But having spent a good deal of my life at universities, they showed up on my doorstep on a regular basis, and had I not had training previous to my current career, I wouldn't have been able to recognize that. But the universities are very ill prepared, many of them, for diagnostics and sort of moving those people into a situation where they can be treated. Is there any indication that your foundation either has been requested or would consider going in that direction? Because I have been really increasingly concerned about the proportion of university students who are exhibiting signs that really need attention.
Yeah, we are involved in some of that, and I'll do this quick. There's a coordinating center of excellence that the Ohio Department of Mental Health, now called something different, created to address campus safety and mental health. It's based in Neomed. We fund them. Amy Lukes, a gal named Amy Lukes runs it, and they assess what the needs are. I mentioned Glenn Close earlier. She has an organization called Bring Change to Mind. They're doing a deep 4-year program at Indiana University to look at basically ending the silence, something similar to what Patrick Kennedy does. The issue we have sometimes is like, hey, if you can convince a kid in college to go seek help, you break the silence. Okay, yeah, I do. I am depressed, or yeah, I do have suicidal ideation. When you convince somebody that it's okay to ask for help and there won't be stigma, help better be there. Like, don't give me 911 and then not have a fire department on the other end of it. So there's an initiative at The Ohio State University to do it's the law now. I think it's House Bill 27 from last year, has a requirement that says they have to have a campus safety and mental health plan. Ohio State has probably one of the best templates statewide, and one of our jobs in philanthropy, the opportunity we have is GAR, for example, does education, but they don't do mental health. But if you're depressed in college, you're not going to be successful. So part of our job is to sell that to folks like them to enhance and leverage the money that we have, and then share, like, hey, Ohio State has it figured out, Akron or Kent or Hiram, so just template that. And we can do that by sometimes giving, offering competitive grants and things like that to those organizations to do it. There's a national organization called Active Minds, which is sort of a grassroots outfit founded by a gal named Allison Malman. She started, when we met her, she had like 60 campus chapters. They're now at almost 500. What she does is it's kind of a student-run, student-led organization to offer peer support. So that kind of stuff, when I came to the foundation 10 years ago, none of that stuff, it was just starting. Now I'm seeing, I hesitate to say we're at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point, it's just we got to decide the tip is kind of where we're at. So there's a lot of that, a lot of opportunity for us. We're in that work to some degree. To me, that's the most important place to be, because if you fix it there, then you don't need more CIT officers, because you're addressing a symptom, not the core problem. So thanks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rick, for taking time to come in today. So this concludes our meeting, and I'd like to thank our greeter today, Ron Strobel, thank our setup crew, Tom Page, James Field, John Hairston, Den Rich, and Ron Barnhouse for tearing down our room. Next week's meeting, as we mentioned, Kirsten Toth from the GAR Foundation. We have a huge Roto-Buck drawing. Today's winner will be $26, and the jackpot is $1,057. That's a ton of money. Yes. Oh, you're going to win? Okay. We're going to let Haley draw the winning ticket. So let's.
Want the number? Come on, Haley. I'm counting on you.
Okay, so the last three numbers, that's four numbers. 3697. It's not me. 3697. Oh, it's Stu. Yeah. I'll come to you. Okay. Okay.
I got to speak to you again.
See, there's a black mark.
Okay.
That's it.